they are celebrating the fact that they have survived, that they're alive as individuals, that their country is alive after more than a year of ferocious onslaught by NATO-backed fascists, paid for by your tax money. So, time to protest that. That is being done in your name, and that's not good, right? And that cannot be allowed to stand, right? So we've got to essentially make a significant protest against this terrible, terrible situation. Right, there are now 300 advisors in the Kiev part of Ukraine. Think about how idiotic that is. Right, 300 is enough to provoke, but it's not enough to affect the outcome of anything. Indeed, what we're seeing is we've seen some films that the U.S. advisors who were there finding that the Kiev fascists are completely inept. Right, that they can't drive a tank up on a flat car. It falls off to one side and rolls over, and so forth. So the ineptitude of the Ukrainian fascists is also very much on display. So again, here come these different towns, and then the occupational categories. And I think this is absolutely fascinating. So naturally, the coal miners get a place of honor. When in the United States have you heard anything good about industrial workers, blue-collar workers, coal miners? They're usually relegated to playing the part of some, victim in some terrible drama of a mine collapsing. So the coal miners march along. Then we get the metal workers, right? Essentially the equivalent of the United Auto Workers, right? People who make appliances or cars or vehicles or other things out of metal. All right, they go by. Then come the electrical workers, people who can, like President Zakharchenko, right, an electrical engineer who worked in a coal mine. And so the railroad workers, and I'll continue this in just a minute, but imagine this parade of industrial workers being applauded and honored. From New York City here, we're at the eve of the Left Forum, and we're going to make a mighty effort to inject mass traction, pro-working people, programmatic content into this into these proceedings, and also to pose some obvious questions. So the thing that I wanted to evoke was this parade, right? The May 11th parade in Lenin Square, big statue of Lenin. In front of you, the administration building, which was the cynosure of the world for quite a few weeks and in even months during the extreme phase of the fighting in the summer of 2014. It's there, and that's the one of the government buildings of the new Donetsk People's Republic, right, comparable to West Virginia, and therefore an old and honorable tradition. So, after you see the coal miners, the railroad workers, the electrical workers, the metal workers, and all the rest of it, then they have the machine tool builders. And then everybody goes, "Ura, ura, ura." And, of course, uras are coming for all of these different groups. I couldn't help thinking when I heard this, right? If you were in the United States and you had a parade and you had a delegation of machine tool workers, somewhere, somehow, somebody would ask, by the way, what's a machine tool? But they all seemed to know what the machine tool was. And they were introducing quite a number of these people as Geroi Socialisticheskого Truda, so hero of socialist labor, obviously things that they had won either in the end phase of the USSR or that they've reinstituted these names. Indeed, why not? Culturally, you can see there's a great desire to turn away from the rotten, degenerate, hedonistic, sybaritic culture of the oligarchs, right? The various Khodorkovskys, Kolomoiskys, all the rest of them. There's a great desire to turn away from that and back to the traditional values of industrial workers under the late Soviet period. And I don't think that's to be condemned at all. So the school teachers, right? The school teachers came out, right? They got huge applause. And then the medical workers, right? So doctors, nurses, technicians, others, huge applause saying, you helped to keep our fighters alive. You saved our lives. People had been wounded by those fascists from Kiev, right? And remember, they all know who started shooting. The Kiev fascists started shooting. Those are the aggressors. These are middle-class people who are fighting a defensive war, so much so that there's really very little military cultism in the parade. It was a military contingent at the end with incidents and so forth, but for all the rest of them, they were not armed. They were waging a political struggle on that day, right? Obviously, if they're going to go to the front, they would need to get their weapons, and they are armed, and they've captured large numbers of tanks and artillery. Right when the Debaltseva pocket was closed some months ago, that is when the equipment level of the Donetsk People's Republic improved a lot, and there are people there who are members of international brigades. If you have any notion of the Spanish Civil War, the American brigade, other Anton brigade in Germany, whatever they were. Yeah, now so they pulled there from all the world. There's one guy who is celebrated, but you have generals like this guy Motorola. Not exactly sure of his name, and other co-commanders. So it's a highly interesting thing. Notice that the networks from the U.S. didn't send anybody. Obama refused to go, right? This was 2 days after the victory parade in Red Square in Moscow at the Kremlin. But it was, I think, a very interesting, sociologically fascinating thing, right? And to see all these different groups, in other words, occupational groups and regional groups, and how that meshed together. All right, so that's a middle-class revolution. Remember the analysis of Professor Baryshnikov. In late 2013, a mass strike or movement, if you will, among the middle class of Donetsk and Lugansk and surrounding areas emerged saying, we can see the Nazis on the Maidan. We don't propose to become subject to their rule. We are going to essentially secede. And at the beginning, they said, we want to do this in the same way that Slovakia departed from the Czechs in Czechoslovakia. There's no need for this to be violent. It's simply an administrative procedure. We want to go back where we were before. We want to rejoin Russia and the Russian Federation. But no, Nuland and others wouldn't allow that. So then the shooting started. So it was a kind of a dialectic between the middle class mass strike organizing in Donetsk, let's say, and then the Maidan. And as Maidan escalated, the mass movement to separate from that in Donetsk and in these other areas, Lugansk, that grew. And Baryshnikov goes through a series of important dates and events and meetings and assemblies and things. They issued their Declaration of Independence on, I believe, the 6th and 7th of April, 11th of April, 2014. This was the one written by Boris Litvinov, okay, representing a committee of 2 or 3 others. And then they held their referendum on May 11th. Now, to organize for that referendum was to risk your life. That was a vote that counted. And one of the things that happened in the parade on May 11th was that the people were invited up for medals, to receive medals. Those were the ones who, among many others, had risked their lives to organize polling places in areas where the Kiev forces might have been or were active or some combination of that. So they were heroes who had carried out the election. Kiev was willing to kill you in order to stop that vote. So you tell me what kind of democracy you can expect from that kind of a degenerate political force. So, and then the turnout is what, 75, 80% don't want to be subjected to the Maidan Nazi extravaganza. So that's where it all started. And then after that, a year essentially of war, and the war goes on May 2nd. Some of the same people that had shown me around Donetsk were in that same neighborhood. I think I mentioned it, the Oktyabrskaya and Spartak neighborhoods in northwest Donetsk, close to the Prokofiev International Airport, indeed separated by a slag berm from the Prokofiev International Airport. There was a new group of foreign journalists, some from Vietnam, I believe. They were being taken around the neighborhood, right, to see these poor elderly women and men and sick people who were still inhabiting that area and having to go down into the bunkers. When the Ukrainians saw that happen, they opened up with artillery on those people. So that's what you're dealing with. Back in a minute. Radio, this is Webster Tarpley here in New York City. We'll have forum on Saturday, Sunday, appearances, the extras. So if you can come on down to John Jay College of Criminal Justice on the West Side, and we'll be there in force. So that's, I think, some idea of Donetsk, right? And then it was the first day of spring. It was the first day of fair weather, I guess we can say. Everybody was out. There was a group of Russian charities who sent a large shipment of like 80 large crates of ice cream, and this was being distributed. So the idea was, I believe there are some pictures of me handing out some of this ice cream because they wanted me to do this, and I was glad to do it. And that the Russian ice cream was better than Nuland's lousy Hostess cupcakes or whatever she had. That on the Maidan that I think everybody remembers. So great holiday and reception at the foreign ministry. In particular, people from South Ossetia and Abkhazia, right, who are there. It's obviously a state system. There is a reviving of the Russian state system, which once included, the USSR and the Warsaw Pact countries. It has been cut down, but it is coming back, and I don't think there's any problem with this. Let me just then switch to the Likhachev International Scientific Conference in St. Petersburg, which as the largest cultural scientific debate on a scholarly level in the world. And it's 30 countries represented by about 220 scholars and papers. I was honored to be one of these. You can see my paper. If you haven't, go to the Likhachev, L-I-K-H-A-C-H-O-V or L-I-H-A-C-H-O-V. The problem being the transliteration of the Cyrillic alphabet into the Roman alphabet, always problematic area. But there, you'll see that there's a paper by me on war avoidance, right? From the United States, probably the one of the more famous representatives was Professor Galbraith of the University of Texas, who unfortunately, I think, chose not to address any of the urgent bilateral U.S.-Russian or questions of maintaining the peace in Europe, war avoidance. Well, I did avoidance and nothing but. I would have been happier to write about economics, but you can't dodge important questions. So I was given a place on the podium in the fifth section, which was about the media And related questions, there was a high official of the Associated Press there. There was the famous